Welcome back. This is Breezing Through, and I'm Emily. All right, so today we're talking about something that may seem a little out of the blue if you're newer to following me. However, I have been creating content since 2014, and this is something I've been talking about since then. So if this seems a little out of the blue to you, trust me, it's not. So this year, 2025, marks 15 years since I was diagnosed with a wheat allergy. No, it is not a gluten intolerance. No, it's not celiac disease. No, it is not a gluten allergy. I am allergic to wheat, as in the grain. Don't hear that a ton. I know that there are other people out there that have that, but so because of that, I eat gluten-free. And today I want to talk about the things that we do to ensure that meals are gluten-free for myself, my son, and my mom. I'm going to get into their stories a little bit as well. So first, I'll talk about me. So my wheat allergy was diagnosed by an allergist. And I have had people, including family members, tell me that this was not an allergy. I'm like, okay, well, you didn't go to medical school and you're not an allergist. So I'm going to take my allergist word over yours any day. So we're going to back it all the way up. When I was an infant, I had terrible, terrible acid reflux, like crying, screaming, constantly throwing up. They thought I had asthma. They gave me asthma medication that actually made me turn blue. That freaked my mom out. She was like, that's not what this is. She does not have asthma. My poor traumatized mother for so many reasons. Anyway, took them a long time to figure that out. And then as I got older, I encountered a whole lot of other issues. I ran into constipation issues as a kid. Turns out that's not super uncommon, but nobody bothered to see if there were any other food-related issues there. My pediatrician at the time just blamed it on me withholding. So I didn't want to poop. So that was it. So I was just prescribed laxatives on a regular basis, which really sucked. Especially since I was old enough to, I was like 8, 9, 10. Like I was not little. I was like, I still remember it. It sucked. I constantly had rashes, especially once I hit puberty. I started getting rashes from like any jewelry that I was wearing that was not 14 karat gold or sterling silver at a minimum. So I would get rashes, and not like my skin would turn green, like hives. Like it was terrible. So I'd get it around my neck. My ears would get super, super infected. I would get rashes like on my fingers, and so I'd just get like a little ring of bumps. I would get them on my wrists. I actually ended up getting rashes on my elbows, and was going to a dermatologist at the time, and they thought that was probably because of the laundry detergent we were using. So they had my mom switch from like whatever she was using at the time to like an all free and clear kind of thing, which was not very popular in the 90s, early 2000s. I also, you ready for this one? I would get hives on my stomach from the buttons, like the nickel on the backs of the buttons of my jeans. So I was wearing bodysuits in middle school to ensure that I could wear jeans. It's insane. Still, nobody thought to test me for any kind of food allergy, or actually any allergy in general, other than the dermatologist being like, oh, well, you have contact dermatitis. So that was cool. Aside from that, so aside from like metal allergies, I could just randomly break out in hives. My favorite example of this, and this was as I was a little bit older, I could also just break out in hives for no reason, which was super cool. And no one could ever figure out why until I was later diagnosed. And starting about 12 years old, I started getting cluster migraines. A cluster migraine is a migraine that lasts more than 2 days. And I was told at the time that was something typically men experienced and not women. Looking back, we all know that's because women weren't studied, but that's a whole other conversation. And they were usually around my period. So to help combat that, I was prescribed Topamax as a prophylactic. So I would take Topamax every day. I was prescribed Imitrex for when I got a migraine. So Topamax every single day. And then when I got a migraine, I would take the Imitrex. And then if the Imitrex did not work, I, as a 12-year-old, was prescribed. And then if the Imitrex did not work, as a 12-year-old, I was prescribed Vicodin. Yes, this was during the opioid crisis. I don't know who in their right mind thought it was a good idea to prescribe a 12-year-old with migraines Vicodin. blows my mind. I only took it once and I hated how it made me feel, so I stopped. I never took it again. For migraines, I definitely was on like oxycodone when I had my hip surgery back in 2018. When you take it, those kinds of medications are so addictive, and it's so easy for people to fall into like becoming reliant on them. It is, again, it astounds me that I was prescribed that at 12. And it's just a prime example of how we had the opioid crisis in our country. Still do. Because of the migraines, my mom and I decided to go off of sugar for a year to see if that helped with the migraines, because she had read something somewhere. And it turns out it kind of helped. Well, it turns out a lot of stuff that has wheat in it has refined sugar in it. Again, nobody in this process is suggesting I get tested for food allergies. Because remember, I'm being prescribed these really heavy medications starting at 12 for these migraines that no one can find any reasons for. I've had done MRIs, I've done CT scans, they've done everything, full workups to figure out what's going on with me. Cannot give an explanation other than you get 2-week-long cluster migraines every month. Here's some meds. Cool. Another symptom was I would have like crippling pain and bloating after I ate every single time. It got so, I've realized now that I've been off of wheat for 15 years that it would build up over time. And then sometimes my body would flush out my reaction. And my allergist actually later described it, like explained this to me. It was basically, and I would have these weight fluctuations. Like I would gain a lot of weight and I would retain it, and then I would lose a bunch of weight and I'd be super thin. And what she was saying was my body didn't know how to react to the wheat. And so I would retain a bunch of water weight and then I would let it go. So that was super fun. So there's a lot of like pain after eating and a lot of bloating. I honestly thought that you didn't, like everybody didn't feel good after they ate. So that was cool. I also had plantar fasciitis, which if you don't know what that is, that's when the fascia on the bottom of your foot swells and it's really painful and it can be really hard to walk. I dealt with plantar fasciitis for 10 years. Could never get it to go away. You can go to PT, do a little bit of PT. Most people can get it to go away in under a year. 10 years. I wore the freaking boots at night. I had custom inserts in all of my shoes. You guys, that was a mess. A mess. Again, nobody bothered to think, maybe this child needs to be tested for allergies. Nope, not once. I also, as I got older, attempted to remove dairy from my diet. That did absolutely nothing. So then it's end of 2010. Yeah, Christmas of 2010. And my mom had just started seeing an allergist for like seasonal allergies and environmental allergies. And she's taking me to the oral surgeon to get my wisdom teeth removed right before Christmas. And we're walking by her allergist's office and she goes, I wonder if you have a food allergy. I'm going to call her and get you scheduled to have an appointment because, oh my gosh, like you could have a food allergy. So I go in, do the prick test. She does a bunch of different stuff. And lo and behold, I react really intensely to wheat from a prick test on my arm. And we're telling her all these symptoms, and she's like, that explains a lot. And I have to say, it changed my life. So in that moment, she did decide, she's like, look, there are a bunch of different things that we can do to make sure you don't have celiac disease, because that was kind of when it was becoming more, like people were becoming more aware of celiacs. It was still fairly new to the general public. But she said, look, really the only way they can determine that is through a colonoscopy or an endoscopy. But to save you from that, since you're only responding to wheat at the moment, I'm going to take some blood work, make sure you're not responding to any other grains. And if you're not, we'll see how just removing wheat goes and then move on to doing celiacs if we need to, like the testing for that. Turns out I didn't need to. I didn't react to any other grains. I still don't react to other grains. For example, someone who has celiac disease can't eat barbecue chips because they have barley in them very often. I can eat barbecue chips because barley does not cause any kind of reaction to me. As long as there's no wheat in them, I don't have a problem. So it took me about a year to completely go off wheat/gluten because I was a college kid and didn't really want to do it. And it was hard and it sucked. But the longer I went of being off of gluten slash wheat, the better I felt. And I lost a ton of weight. And it explains so much, including I stopped having migraines. I stopped having to take all of those medications for those migraines. They were completely rooted to my wheat allergy. I maybe get one migraine, maybe two a year now, and I can take an Excedrin migraine, take a nap, and it's gone, which is insane to me. So with all the other symptoms, I still, like I said, I only have a couple migraines a year. My weight is so much easier to like maintain and manage because I'm not constantly in this weird fluctuation. My skin is still pretty sensitive to a lot of things, but not as sensitive. Like I don't get rashes on my fingers anymore. My wrists don't break out anymore. I don't have hives on my arms. I still react to like necklaces, especially if it's hot outside. And my ears are pretty sensitive, but it is not like I don't constantly have a rash somewhere on my body, which is nice. I don't get stomach pains after eating anymore. I have a healthy digestive system. And guess what? That plantar fasciitis, totally gone. Don't have to wear inserts in my shoes. Don't have to wear the boots. Like it is gone. Crazy. So now, how does my body react to an exposure? So my reactions are much more intense now because obviously I was eating it for so long that my body was kind of just like maintaining. I have such a bad itch. Now it's more like my body will be like, oh my gosh, why did you put this in my body? And for like sirens. And now, 15 years post diagnosis, I do not ever eat wheat slash gluten intentionally. Because why would I? Because of the following response. So I will instantly get a migraine and I can feel it, like it starts at the base of my skull and it starts coming up and it comes over and I just like, I cannot keep my eyes open. I get crippling stomach pains. Like I've been in labor. I've had both a vaginal birth and a C-section. And I've had this hip surgery that I've talked about in the past. And this is like, cannot move, comes in waves. It is just absolutely horrendous. Combination of diarrhea and constipation, which is lovely. Brain fog. My ADHD meds will not work when I have a reaction. I will get hives, guaranteed, definitely bloating, and it lasts 3 days. It's lovely. It's absolutely lovely. So obviously I avoid that at all costs. And usually it's an accident or someone has told me something doesn't have wheat in it and it does, even though I'm super careful, and it sucks. So when it came to my kids, when my daughter was born, I kept a super close eye on her because there are other women in my family who have either an intolerance or an allergy, or they can tell that their body has a reaction to gluten or wheat. So we kept a really close eye on her. As I've talked about in the past, she is autistic and has ARFID, and so that was a little bit more scary for her just because she really had a lot of restrictions on what she was willing to eat anyway. Luckily, and we've had her tested, she does not have a wheat allergy. So didn't have to worry about that. So she's been doing great. When it comes to my son, there's something on my nose. After my son was born, we started, obviously, he didn't eat any solids till after he was a year old, and then we started giving him solids, and I started noticing that he was having clear, like, it's hard to tell when they're that young, but like clearly he was getting really bad headaches and he was having digestive issues and constipation and diarrhea. Like everything just got messed up when I started giving him things that had wheat in them. And so I instantly took him off of anything that had wheat in it. And then I consulted with his pediatrician and told him the family history. And she was like, nope, keep him off that. That just makes sense. And we've noticed that anytime he accidentally eats something, he's exposed to something, that he then has a very similar reaction to me. I haven't noticed. No, he did have really sensitive skin when he was a baby. So never mind. He does. He does have that. So then when it comes to my mom noticed, obviously she and I went on this sugar-free diet when I was in middle school, and it really helped her as well. Well, as I got older and I had my diagnosis, she realized that gluten and wheat were impacting her, but she wasn't showing a reaction like I was, and not in her blood work, not on her prick test, nothing like that. But she has weird prick test reactions anyway. But she was noticing that when she didn't eat gluten or wheat, her body just felt a lot better. A few years later, it was discovered that she had a pretty bad mold allergy. And it turns out that a lot of the grains in the US contain mold in them because of how they're stored after they're harvested. So anyway, that's what a doctor told her. I'm just repeating that. Don't take that as research that for yourself. Talk to a medical professional. And so she has completely gone off gluten and wheat as well. And so the three of us pretty religiously stay off of gluten and wheat. So today, like I said, I want to talk about the things that we do to make sure that our meals are gluten-free, because not everybody in either of our houses are gluten-free. So let's get started. So first up, in my house specifically, we generally just eat gluten-free. When my husband and I first got married, I'd only been diagnosed for about 2 years with my wheat allergy. And so I was actually making separate food for us. Like if we ever had pasta, I would make him regular pasta and me gluten-free pasta. But then I started noticing that he was eating my leftovers. And so I thought that was a ridiculous waste of time and food. And so I just started making everything gluten-free. We generally kind of just eat gluten-free anyway. We eat a lot of rice, potatoes, meats, veggies, fruits. And so there isn't a ton of reason to substitute gluten-free things. But generally, if something is being made for the entire house, it's going to be gluten-free. My daughter, who is not gluten-free, will sometimes also eat gluten-free things. She likes to have some of my favorite gluten-free items. Very specifically, a lot of the stuff that is gluten-free that you can get from Trader Joe's. But I really don't mind, because it just means that there are less instances and opportunities for stuff to be contaminated in my house. The second thing we do is prepare gluten-free items first and separately. So for example, we typically have most of our big family gatherings at my parents' house, and the majority of the family is not gluten-free. So that's an opportunity where we're going to be making a gluten-free option of something as well as a regular option of something. And let's take the example of pasta. So what we would do is we would make the gluten-free pasta first and make sure it's strained first, and that it has its own utensil that is being used to stir it and in the straining process. That way there's just no cross-contamination. Another example is on Sundays, we typically have burgers at my parents' house, and my dad will grill all the burgers on the grill. And then there's a separate shelf on the grill where he will put all of the regular burger buns. Well, to make sure that there's no contamination there, we heat up burger buns for my mom and myself in their toaster oven inside the house. And that kind of goes into number 3, which is plate items separately. So anything that is gluten-free gets a separate plate. It's never going to be next to something that's not gluten-free. It may be next to something that just is inherently gluten-free, like certain cheeses or fruits or veggies, but it's never going to be on the same dish or in the same dish as something that has gluten in it, just to ensure that there is not going to be any contamination. We also make sure that if something is gluten-free and needs a utensil, it has its own separate utensil. And often, especially in a bigger family gathering, we actually move all the gluten-free stuff to a separate part of the kitchen so that everybody knows all the gluten-free stuff is over here on this counter and everything else is over here. That way nobody accidentally cross-contaminates anything. Number 4 is one-use utensils when using condiments. So I kind of touched this with number 3 when talking about having separate utensils for anything that's gluten-free, but this is specifically for condiments. So let's say, for example, you're using jam and you're gonna put butter on a piece of bread and then put jam on it. Well, first off, we have separate butter dishes, especially at my parents' house. At my house, we don't have this because we just all use gluten-free bread for the most part. But at my parents' house, they have a separate butter dish for glutinous bread and one for gluten-free bread. And so if you're using whatever butter you're using, you put that on your bread. And then when it comes to putting jam on said bread, to make sure that it's not contaminated, we're using spoons, and you're gonna spoon it out of the container and then plop it onto the bread without touching the bread, and then put the utensil back in the jar. If the utensil does touch the food, it's contaminated, it goes away, we get a fresh one. So it's not necessarily always single use, but it just ensures that, nobody's using a knife to get jam out of a jar, spreading it all over their bread that has wheat on it, and then putting that same knife back in the jar and contaminating the entire jar, because that's what would happen. And just doing that will cause a reaction for any of us who have the allergy if we were then to use
the contents of that jar. And I know that might sound extreme to somebody who says, oh, well, this isn't like an anaphylactic allergy. This is just like a stomach ache. It's not just a stomach ache. It actually does like damage to our bodies, and it's really uncomfortable, and it lasts 3 days. It's a whole thing. And so it's worth it to do it like this. Number 5 is eating safe foods before going to an event. So if I'm going to my parents' house, another family member's house that I know is going to have safe food for me and is going to make sure that there is no cross-contamination, I'm not going to do this. But if I'm going to like a friend's house that doesn't eat gluten-free, or an event at school, church, within the community, I am going to eat beforehand, because I just don't know that there's not going to be cross-contamination, and it is not worth it to me to risk it. I've done it way too many times, and at this point I'm past it. I will just eat beforehand, and I can politely decline food when it's offered, and that way I'm safe, my son is safe. I know my mom does this as well, and it's just a better way to live. I always appreciate it when people do provide gluten-free food, and it's a lot easier when I'm going to like a catered event, because those have to be gluten-free. Like if they're offering a gluten-free option, or they're saying something is gluten-free, like at a hotel, for example, that is going to be gluten-free. I'm not worried about that, especially in the last few years. But for the most part, especially if it's somebody that does not have to eat gluten-free, it's not about offending them. It's not about not trusting them. I just don't know how careful they are with cross-contamination, and it's just not worth it. Number 6 is labeling everything. Often when I know I do this, and my mom does this, when we get stuff from the grocery store, especially bigger things that are in bulk, we will put them into like a plastic or a glass container and then label it as gluten-free. And you're probably wondering why we would do that. Why take it out of its original container? Well, we live in Tennessee, and it's very humid here. And if for any reason anything is left open for an extended period of time, it gets really gross. And I would say stale isn't the right word. It kind of get, like, stuff can get mushy because it's so humid here. And so making sure stuff is in containers that will seal to make sure everything stays fresh longer is really important. And so labeling everything to make sure that my kids know, my husband knows, I know, anybody who's visiting knows that certain things are gluten-free is really important. Number 7 is checking food labels. So because I have a wheat allergy and it's not gluten in general, I generally eat gluten-free. However, there are instances where I will eat something that is not quote unquote gluten-free, but it doesn't have wheat in it. And so instead of just going for all gluten-free stuff that's labeled gluten-free, if I'm looking for a specific ingredient or an item, I will check the food label to make sure that it does not have wheat in it, because wheat is one of the required allergens that is listed on all food packaging in the United States. This is the same case for my son. We've noticed that he can eat barbecue chips, doesn't have a problem with those, and those contain barley for the most part. My mom has to be a bit stricter about her diet because of how broad it is. But I know other people who are gluten-free, either for celiacs, for an intolerance, or for a number of other reasons, that also check labels as well.
Okay, I know that was a lot of information, but hopefully this will help somebody, because like I said, I know not everybody's houses are all gluten-free. Ours definitely aren't. And it's helpful to have these kinds of systems set up so that everybody knows how to do things. And especially when you have people come visit, it's a really easy way to be like, okay, you use this and I use this, don't touch my stuff. And it makes it a lot harder for you to be exposed or contaminated. So hopefully that helps. Let me know in the comments. I can do a lot more videos about like gluten-free and the stuff we eat and stuff that we avoid if you're interested in that. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.